Okay, hello everybody, and welcome to our PowerTips Live series. Today we'll be focusing on the Raritan brand PowerTips. As with previous ones, my name is Joel Bryan, and I'm the Global Post Sales Support Director here at Legrand for the Raritan and the ServerTech brands. And in today's session, we're going to learn different methods that are available for configuring and managing your firmware on your Raritan devices. And walking us through these sessions will be Duncan Gwynn, who's our post-sales product specialist. And following the walkthrough, we'll open it up for questions pertaining to this particular function and feature. And if you have other questions outside of this, it's always best to reach us at tech@raritan.com. We have a team there, ready to get back to you. You can also give us a call and get a live person, and we'll be able to help out as well. And like I said, following, we'll open it for questions. I'll take everybody off mute. I'll just remind you to make sure that the device you're on make sure that's unmuted as well, so you can go ahead and ask some questions. Okay, so with that, I'm going to pass the ball over to Duncan. And Duncan, it's in your court now.
All right, thanks, Joel. So as Joel mentioned, we are covering configuration and firmware management on your Raritan PDUs. And we've got quite a few things to cover today, so we'll just dive right in. We'll start with configurations. And those of you that have been following along with us may recall a couple webinars ago, we covered our mass deployment tool, which is this Excel spreadsheet that has a number of fields where we can configure a handful of PDU parameters that are important for deployment. And we filled this out. We generated some lists and some files that we would put on a USB stick that we would then plug into our Raritan controller, and it would configure everything for us. So that configuration file, if you recall, looked like this. It's got a handful of lines to configure some basic network and PDU parameters, and this is what we refer to as the raw configuration. We have a raw configuration, a bulk configuration, and then we have some backup restore options. So I will show you how to extract a complete raw configuration from a Raritan PDU and then use that to manipulate and build your own custom configuration file to do some more advanced configurations. So you close out of this, and I go back into my web browser here. I have a PDU that I've already set up. So I've got this one on the network, and I've put in some custom items here, including event rules. And those that have been tracking with us since we started this webinar series may recall our event rule that we created to send an email whenever a critical alert happens. So we set up an action and we set up a rule. In order for this to function, we also had to set up our SMTP email server, which is all configured here. So what I want to show you how to do is take these settings that we've put on this PDU and put them on, all your PDUs. So we have this process documented, and we're going to be using something called SCP, Secure Copy Protocol, which is a file transfer method over SSH. So we have instructions here, but I'm just going to walk you through it so you don't have to read this while we're in the webinar. So I use something called PSCP, which is PuTTY's SCP client. So I've got my environment variable defined already, so I can just type in PSCP. And then what we want to do is, if you are using a port other than the default, you can specify it with -P. 22, I'm using the default, so I'm just going to put that there. And then we'll put in our username, the admin user of the PDU, which is admin, at the PDU's IP address. And then after the IP address, we'll put in :/raw_config.txt. and then we'll add a space after that, and now we will specify the name of the file we want to save it as. So I'm just going to say new config.txt. And it's going to prompt me for the password for the admin user, so I'll go ahead and plug that in. And you can see it's not a very large file, so the transfer happens pretty quick. So I'm going to open that up, type the file name and hit enter. You can see here there's a lot more data than what we saw in our simple USB stick config. So there's a lot in here where there's commented out internal. Those are items that you can't use in the config. They're just for internal use of the PDU, but they're there. You just can't use them in the raw configuration. So what I want to do is take my event engine actions that we discussed with that critical email alert. So you can see here, critical alert device names, what we specified. So I'll take everything that's action underscore 002. Left a couple out there. So I will copy that, and then I'm going to put that just underneath the rest of my configuration. So I've got the action. Now I want to get that rule that we specified that actually sends the email when that critical alert happens. So rule underscore 002. And then as we mentioned, we do need the SMTP configuration as well. So I just happen to know that that's towards the bottom of the configuration file here. You can also use Control F and search for SMTP until you find what you're looking for. But I'll copy these into the file. And where the raw configuration is really powerful is its ability to reference that devices.csv file that we set up last time in our mass deployment tool. So you can see here my from address is my PDU name at raritan.com. So I don't want to have every PDU in my data center using the same email address because that won't be beneficial to me knowing where the alert's coming from. So what I can do is, just as I have the PDU name specified up here, I can take this $1 to reference column 1 PDU name and plug that in down below. So now when I load this configuration, the email address is going to be whatever I have in column 1 of my devices sheet at raritan.com, or you could obviously put in your own domain there. So I'm going to go ahead and save this. Now I have my updated config that I can either put on a USB stick and plug into PDUs to do that configuration, or I'm going to show you another method. Just as we use SCP to download the configuration, we can use it to upload. So in our documentation, we have to upload raw configuration data, and we have a few different scenarios that you could use. If you're only configuring a single PDU, it's very simple. You just specify the file and send it to the PDU. Now, if you want to do multiple PX3s, you would have to have that device list file so that it can do a serial number match and apply the appropriate parameters. So just to remind you what that looks like, I'll open up my devices.csv file. And you can see I've got some items here. I have what I want the PDU name to be. I have a column that I was using for PDU name previously, but I'm not going to use this right now, so this is irrelevant. Then I have column 3, which is my serial number. So when this file's processed, it's going to make sure that the PDU with this serial number gets this name. And I could do other device-specific things in here as well, such as IP addresses, outlet names, really anything that you could imagine. So I'll need to close this out, otherwise I'll have a failed upload. Can't have the CSV file open when I try to push it to the PDU. So I'm going to use the syntax that is on our page here, and I'll just specify PSCP. I'll specify my CSV file, so devices.csv, then my configuration file, config.txt, and then just as we did before, admin at the IP address of the PDU we want to configure. So this one's different. And then it's going to be : this time it's going to be raw_config update. And then after that, since we're doing the serial number match, we would do a / match equals serial. And that's important because you can also match by MAC address. In the case of an iX7 controller where you have 2 MAC addresses, it's just easier to use the serial number. So serial, colon, and 3 would be the column that they'll find the serial number in. So with that, I can hit enter and then plug in my admin password for that PDU that I want to configure. And you'll see that it's uploading those files, and it took. So in just a short moment, that PDU will be configured, and we can go and view what that configuration looks like and how those changes took place. So another thing that we can touch on is, we downloaded the configuration via SCP. We mentioned bulk configuration. So if I, again, go to the PDU that I've already configured, and this is under the maintenance menu, we have the bulk configuration option. And we did go over this briefly in one of our other webinars, but just to touch on this again, we can create a new profile. And say for this one, I wanted to just do authentication settings. So I'll create a new profile. I'll select it as a default because that's important for downloading it. And then what I can do is exclude all settings. And then I can select only the settings that I want. So I can go down to authentication and just select my LDAP settings. So I'll include those. That way I know nothing else that I don't want configured is selected. So just LDAP. And I can save this profile. And then I can download it either in an encrypted or a clear text format, and I can even use a password to protect it. But I'll download that bulk configuration file, and it downloads as bulk_config.txt. So this we can use also in the SCP setting. There's a way to upload these bulk configs via SCP and download them. But we can also use PowerIQ as a tool to push those, which we'll show later in this webinar. So now that my PDU has rebooted, let's go have a look. And we can see the PDU name took effect. So that's a good sign. Obviously, the configuration took. PDU name is there. If I look at the device settings and, oops, go into device network services and look at SMTP server, we can see that read PDU-A at Raritan.com. That's all good. All my settings are there. And then if I look in my event rules, I can see that my critical email alert is there and my critical inlet alert is still in the process of loading. So if we jump back over to .80, we downloaded that bulk config. I want to show you how to use that bulk configuration in PowerIQ. So you log into my PowerIQ server. And PowerIQ has something called bulk configuration activities. And this is all documented in their help documentation, so you can reference this article later if needed. But once you're loaded in the Facility Items tab, you have Activities, and then you have the ability to do bulk configuration activities. And when you're doing a bulk configuration, it's important that the items that you're configuring in bulk are of the same model number and of the same firmware version. Otherwise, the bulk configuration is not going to take place. You'll get a failure. So if I click on Manage Bulk Configuration Templates, you'll be able to see all the templates that have been created in the past and run, but I can also create a new one. So I can add a new template here. And PowerIQ automatically backs up PDUs. So we can do a restore configuration. In the event that we had a failure, we can replace the PDU, and then we can use one of these configurations to just restore it. That way it has all the same settings. It's got the same name, outlet names, things of that nature will be restored to the PDU, which is fantastic. Now, if we are just deploying PDUs and we want to clone some settings, we'll take clone. So this would leave out device-specific information like network and things of that nature. So I'll have to upload the config that I downloaded from our PDU. So I put in the model number of our PDU in question here. Manufacturer is going to be Raritan. This feature is only available for Raritan and ServerTech PDUs. And then I can upload my bulk config file. And it's important that you put a comment to specify what settings you're configuring with this. Otherwise, they can easily get lost in the sea of configurations. So I'm just going to put authentication settings. So you can see I have that profile loaded in now. So I can check the box and then save it. And then that will keep that as an action to configure. Now, if I scroll down a little bit, we can also use PowerIQ to push firmware upgrades to our PDUs. So you can see we have a variety of ServerTech and Raritan firmwares loaded. I could check this box and then save that as well to keep that as an action. I'm not going to do it in this demonstration, but that is how you would do this in PowerIQ. For the password update here, that's another option that's available. And this would update the password of the account that's managing the PDU in PowerIQ. So when you add the PDU, you add it with an admin account or maybe a service account of some kind. This would update that account's password. So if I put in old password Raritan, new password Raritan 123, it's going to upload that or change that password on all my PDUs. And most importantly, it's going to change it in PowerIQ as well. So it's kind of a seamless transition. So I don't temporarily lose management of my PDUs. You have the ability to change trap destinations for SNMP. So if you've got some other trap receivers that you want to send traps to from the PDUs, you can input that data here. And then down in SNMP configuration, you can make changes to SNMP as well. So if you want to switch from V2C to V3, for security reasons, you can easily do that. And as we mentioned with that password change, the key feature here is that it changes it both in PowerIQ and on the PDU, so it's a seamless transition. If I just use a bulk config template in PowerIQ to change my SNMP settings, I would have a bunch of alerts in PowerIQ telling me that my PDU can't be reached because we've changed the SNMP community strings. So this is an important feature and it's very powerful to use. But for now, I'm just going to show you how to push that config. So we've got this saved, and now I can click next. And since we plugged in that model number when we saved the configuration in PowerIQ, it automatically filters for us here and shows us the models that are available for us to make the changes to. So I can use this to select all, add the PDUs down below. So we have an available PDUs, they're all gone now. Then we have selected PDUs. Now, if I maybe selected this one by mistake, I can check it and then remove it. So this is the PDU that we actually extracted the configuration from, so I don't need to configure that one. So with my PDU selected, I can run the bulk config, and it's going to ask me to confirm. And we'll see a status screen load up, and we can see that the configuration is taking place. When the configuration loads, the PDU reboots, so PowerIQ is going to reestablish connectivity, and then we'll be able to verify those settings on our PDU. So while we wait for that to finish taking place, we discussed firmware upgrades in PowerIQ. We do have the USB stick method that we discussed using our mass deployment tool, so you can load your firmware onto a USB stick and upload it that way. But if you maybe are working remote and you need to do some upgrades, you don't want to do it one by one in the web UI, we do offer firmware upgrades through SCP as well. So it's again simple syntax here. We can go in and specify PSCP or SCP depending on what program you're using to do the SCP. We can specify our firmware file. What I like to do is just copy the file name, or you can rename it to a file name that's easier to type in from memory. Paste that file name, admin at the IP address of the target PDU you want to upgrade, and then :/FW update. And this will put that file on the PDU and begin the upgrade process. Of course, we have to authenticate per usual. You can see that that is now beginning. We have a progress bar there. Now this is the upload progress. Once the firmware actually begins loading the PDU, we won't be able to manage, we won't be able to see the progress in SCP just because of the limitation of SCP. But the PDU will reboot and we'll regain connectivity, see the upgraded firmware. So now that PowerIQ is finished doing its upload, we can see that it completed the configuration of our target PDU. And we can now log in. And to verify the authentication settings that we moved from one PDU to the other, we can go into Security, Authentication, and then we can see that my LDAP server is loaded in here. And we can view and edit those settings if we wanted to. But everything took, and you can do that to several PDUs at a time. So it really save you time in terms of configuration. Push those all out through PowerIQ. So just to provide a quick recap, we've got a few different configuration methods available. We have the raw configuration, which is best used in a mass deployment setting where maybe you're configuring device-specific parameters, such as PDU names, IP addresses, etc. We have bulk configuration, which is going to be best used for global settings like authentication or maybe SMTP servers, things of that nature. You can also do the event rules through that. And it's really going to be best for any settings where you don't have to worry about specifying something unique on the PDU. That's a really good template for PowerIQ, pushing out the bulk config through PowerIQ. We also have the backup restore, which I didn't cover in the web UI, but it's pretty self-explanatory. This is a full, one-to-one backup. So all of the device-specific information is backed up, and you can restore that through the web UI, or you guessed it, through SCP. And that's obviously, in the event of replacement of a PDU, maybe you are upgraded to a newer model, or you had a failure that you are replacing. That's when you would use backup restore. And the firmware upgrades are pretty self-explanatory as well. You should, keep your devices up to date to maintain the latest security settings and features of your Raritan PDUs. So at this time, I'm going to send it back over to Joel. We'll open it up for any questions. And Joel, it's you.
Okay, great. Thank you, Duncan. That was good, really informative. Again, if you have any questions, I'm going to unmute everybody. And I would ask that you make sure your device itself is also unmuted. Okay. And you can also type questions in the chat window as well. We'll read those out as well. Okay. It doesn't look like we have any questions as yet. We'll give a couple more minutes here. And if you've been following us since we started this back in March, I'm usually clean shaven. This is my beard. This is as much as I've gotten in 4 months, 5 months, but it's getting there. Still no questions. Okay. And I'll talk about my beard more. Questions. I don't think my wife is a fan. I don't know if she really likes it or not. She doesn't say anything. Hey, but she can't leave.
She's just waiting for quarantine to end, so you guys don't have to work from home. Doesn't have to see your beard anymore.
It's nowhere to go.
Okay, so we do have a question now.
Okay.
What is your preferred method to configure? So my personal preferred method is going to be raw config, just because I'm typically dealing with customers that are maybe deploying PDUs for the first time and need to do a lot of unique parameters. So they need to set, PDU names and outlet names and IP addresses and stuff like that. So that's really the best tool for that. And sometimes it's just easier to provide those files, especially if you're maybe working with like a remote hands team. You can just give them the files that you've made, and they can put it on a USB stick and just walk around and plug it in and configure everything. So I think that's the most powerful method. It's very widely used, but some people don't know how to customize that raw config themselves and receive those individual parameters. So that's my preferred method.
Yeah, and I would add to that, if you need help with any of that, the configuration, again, you could reach out to our support, tech at Raritan, and we'll help you. We'll help you build it. We'll show you how to do it. If you need sort of a personal sort of session with you and your team, we can set that up as well. So there's plenty of options here when it comes time to start rolling out and deploying your PDUs, or just making parameter changes on a larger scale. If you have PowerIQ, great. If you don't, there are definitely ways that we can help make that a lot easier for you guys.
So we had another question come in. What about passwords? Are they stored in clear text? That's a great question. So when you extract that raw configuration, again, there's a lot of data here. And if we kind of go down towards the bottom, we'll see our users. And we can see the password here is not in clear text, it's hashed. So, you can, copy this hashed password and, put that in a configuration so that you can change passwords on other PDUs as well. Now we do have what we call a magic config key, where you are able to input a password in clear text, but whenever you download one, they're not in clear text. Now, other items like SNMP community strings, when you download a config, you'll see v1, v2 community strings in clear text. But we also have methods to provide those in an encrypted format or hash format if you wish to, again, like provide a USB stick to a smart hands team that you don't know, you can maybe secure that a little bit more. But by default, you can see our read community string public here is in clear text, but user passwords are not. Same would go for SNMP v3 users, and SNMP v3 passwords, they would be hashed as well.
Okay, great. I see another question. Is there a known issue with bridging mode? I run into intermittent connectivity with Ethernet 1 when bridged to another PDU in the same rack.
There's no specific known issues. We can certainly work with you on that and see what's going on. Sometimes it could be like if you're using like USB to bridge, it could be a USB cable that might have a loose wire or something in it. And I've seen customers just replace the USB cable and connectivity is fine again. But no specific known issues in relation to the controller. So if you email tech at Raritan, we can get some diagnostics from you and we can look into that further.
Yep, absolutely.
I see another question here as well. What are the minimum config items I need to do to get the PDUs in the network and manageable from PowerIQ? So we covered a lot of that a couple webinars ago in our mass deployment tool, and a lot of those items can be plugged in here. So you need, of course, network. So you got to configure it with an IP address or DHCP if you're using a DHCP server. You're going to need some form of SNMP, which, if you're using V1, V2C, you've got your community strings. If you're using V3, you have to specify enable SNMP V3 for that user. So if you want to use the admin user or service account, you'd have to build that. And that's really it to get it into PowerIQ. You use the network, the IP address, you use the admin credentials of the PDU and the SNMP credentials, and PowerIQ will discover it and be able to communicate with it.
Okay, yeah, no, that's a definitely good question. Okay, and I don't think we have any more coming in. So with that, I would like to thank everybody. I like first thank you, Duncan, for taking us through those steps and showing us this feature and function and how it works. And thank all the attendees for joining us today. And if you didn't get your question answered or you didn't get a chance to ask, again, you could always email us and we'll respond to your questions and talk to you as needed. You know, we'll be doing this again next month. So you know, more than likely you'll get an email to let you know what the coming session will be ahead of time. So if you're interested, please feel free to join or share that invite with any of your colleagues that you think will benefit. So with that, I'd like to say thank you, and I hope to see you again next month, and my beard will probably grow a little bit more. Okay, thank you, everybody.
You look good, Joel.